My narcissist mom kicked me out for her gold digger boyfriend. Now he's gone and she's furious I won't let her near my baby. I'm 25 now, and I haven't spoken to my mom in 5 years, not since she kicked me out at 20 to make room for her new boyfriend. At the time, this guy, let's just call him Rick, was her ex-boyfriend turned flavor of the month again. The man was a blatant gold digger, and he didn't even try to hide it. They had been dating for about 3 months when she brought him to the house. In classic fashion, she didn't bother warning him that she had a daughter. That's just the kind of thoughtless person she's always been. My mom's 50 now, but back then she was nearing 45 and telling everyone she was barely touching 40. Total lie, but with all the Botox and fillers, she pulled it off well enough to be convincing. I never knew Rick's exact age, but he seemed like he was probably in his early to mid-30s, not older than that. He was decent looking, I'll give him that. And to be fair, my mom's always been attractive for her age too. So at first, I figured maybe they made sense together. That was until he started running his mouth. Right out of the gate, Rick wouldn't shut up about how lucky he was that my mom had so much of her own money. He went on and on about how he admired strong, independent women, and how her financial success is what drew him in. But anyone with eyes could see that what really pulled him in was our massive house, the open layout of our living room, and the expensive decor. He might have said he loved her independence, but I could tell he loved her bank account a lot more. It wasn't exactly a secret that my mom was rich. But the truth behind that wealth? It didn't come from any hard work of her own. She inherited a fortune after her parents passed away. My mom never had a career. The money came from a company my grandparents built from the ground up, and after they died, the business was passed on to my uncle. He's been running it ever since. My mom never took the slightest interest in learning the ropes or getting involved. As long as those checks kept coming, that was all she cared about. She's always been the type to drift from one hobby to another without ever putting any real effort into anything, not work, not passion projects, and definitely not motherhood. To be honest, I'm convinced I was just one of her bored whims. I fully believe that if she hadn't been so indecisive and flaky, I probably wouldn't even exist. She would have ended the pregnancy. So in a weird way, I owe my life to her lack of commitment. Thankfully, my grandparents stepped in. They were the ones who truly raised me, since my mom couldn't be bothered. I think she got tired of the whole mom thing halfway through the pregnancy and just went back to partying and hanging out with her friends. Growing up, I spent so much time with my grandparents that for a while, I genuinely thought they were my real parents. As for my actual father, I've never met him. It was a one-night stand, and my mom never had any way of contacting him afterward, nor did she try. Despite everything, my grandparents were loving and dependable. They never made me feel like I was missing out on anything. My dad was a ghost, and my mom kept me at arm's length, but they gave me a safe, stable childhood. That all changed when my grandma died during my junior year of high school. A few years later, my grandpa passed too, and that loss hit me hard. They were the only people who truly cared about me. Thankfully, I still had my uncle. We were never especially close, and we didn't talk much, but he told me he'd look out for me, and he kept that promise. Even though I technically lived with my mom, I spent every weekend at my grandparents' place. She was rarely home anyway, so I'd be alone after school, which actually worked out fine for me. I liked having the quiet to do homework and unwind. After my grandparents passed, I moved out to go to college, but I still came home about once a month or during holidays. It wasn't because I missed my mom, I didn't. I just missed the familiarity of home. Being around her was something I tolerated, not something I looked forward to. My mom never changed. She's always been this shallow, self-absorbed socialite who thrives on attention and drama. That was her routine for as long as I can remember. She'd bounce from one boyfriend to another, never able to hold on to a relationship. Some guys were jealous of her busy social life, especially since it involved other men. Others just got bored, or she got bored first and dumped them without a second thought. I met several of her boyfriends over the years. Every time one of them got dumped, I'd hear the screaming and door slamming from my room upstairs. And not once did she ever try to make one of them stay because she just didn't care enough to bother. But Rick was the first time I couldn't see what was coming. Something about him was different, and I was honestly surprised my mom didn't immediately realize he was using her. She's usually good at spotting people like that. She brought him home for the first time after they'd been dating for 3 months. Coincidentally, I happened to be visiting that weekend. When I greeted Rick politely, he looked completely thrown off. That's when my mom casually mentioned she had a daughter, like it just slipped her mind. He seemed pretty weirded out by it for a second, but then he snapped back into his smooth, charming act like nothing had happened. But I saw right through it. He wasn't into my mom, he was into her lifestyle. And he didn't even try that hard to hide it. All through dinner, he couldn't stop going on about how lucky he was to be with such a successful woman. Rick kept going on during dinner about how lucky he was to have found such a beautiful, independent woman and how proud he was that he'd somehow managed to impress her enough to be dating her. It was obvious he was laying it on thick, and my mom was eating it up. He especially loved to bring up how wealthy she was. That seemed to be the biggest attraction for him. Honestly, he couldn't have made his intentions more obvious if he'd held up a sign. After we finished eating, my mom pulled me aside and casually mentioned that she'd invited Rick to stay with us for a couple of weeks. Apparently, he'd just lost his job and was about to be evicted by his landlord. And just like that, everything clicked. That's why he'd been so full of compliments. He needed a free place to stay, and my mom was his golden opportunity. I thought about warning her, but I usually kept my mouth shut when it came to her relationships. We didn't have the kind of bond where I could talk to her openly about serious stuff. And part of me figured she knew what she was doing anyway. I stayed quiet, choosing to give Rick the benefit of the doubt, something I'd end up seriously regretting. A few weeks passed, and I didn't come back home until the next month. While I was at college, my mom and I barely kept in touch, so I had no clue how things were going between her and Rick. But when I returned, it was clear that Rick had completely moved in and turned my mom's house into his own personal man cave. The place was a mess, but weirdly enough, she didn't seem to mind. She brushed it off, telling me the housekeeper would take care of everything by the next morning. That surprised me. My mom had always been obsessive about keeping the house spotless. But again, I didn't say anything. I didn't think it was my place, and I had no interest in getting into it with her. Just like every other visit, I barely interacted with anyone. I stayed in my room the entire weekend, only coming downstairs to grab meals before heading right back up to eat alone. I wasn't trying to be rude, I just didn't want to be bothered. I'd gotten used to doing my own thing and staying out of everyone's way. Here's the kicker: even though I didn't say a single word to Rick that weekend, he somehow still took issue with me being there. On the day I was supposed to head back to campus, my mom came into my room and said she needed to talk. That alone was unusual. We barely spoke unless it was necessary, so I had a bad feeling immediately. And sure enough, it was exactly what I feared. She said she'd prefer if I didn't come back home anymore. Apparently, Rick had complained that my presence made him uncomfortable. He said having me around threw off the vibe he and my mom had going. He claimed they had found a good rhythm living together, and I had disrupted it just by showing up for a couple of days. According to him, it didn't feel like a bachelor-style setup anymore. He said it was starting to feel too much like a family situation, and that was something he wasn't ready for. I knew it was all nonsense. He was just trying to push me out, and this was his excuse. It was insulting. That house had been my home long before he showed up with his freeloading ways. So I asked my mom straight out, when was Rick leaving? She had told me this was temporary, just until he found another job. But that question hit a nerve. She snapped. Told me it wasn't any of my business. Said it was her house and that since I was an adult now, it was time for me to clear out. She made it very clear she was serious about Rick, and that if he didn't want me around, then I wasn't welcome. At that point, I knew arguing was pointless. Still, I looked her dead in the eye and told her that Rick was using her, and one day she'd regret choosing him over her own daughter. But she didn't seem to care, and honestly, neither did I anymore. I packed my stuff and left that very day. I stayed away for the next few months, not even thinking about going home, not that I had one anymore. When Christmas break came around, the college dorms closed, and staying on campus wasn't an option. That's when I reached out to my uncle. It was awkward, since we weren't very close. We'd kept in touch here and there, but I hadn't seen him much growing up. Still, I had no other option. My grandparents had left behind a college fund for me, so my education and expenses were covered, but they never could have predicted I'd be kicked out of my home. When I called him, my uncle didn't hesitate. He told me I could stay with him and his family for a while. I'll always be grateful to him for that. He opened his home to me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere again. We ended up having a deep conversation during that visit. He admitted that he had always kept his distance because of my mom. They didn't get along growing up, and he thought that forming a relationship with me might cause more drama with her. So, for the sake of peace, he stayed away as long as he knew I was being taken care of. But once my mom kicked me out, he felt like he had to step in. He said he couldn't just let me end up homeless or stranded. Since then, we've gotten close. His wife is one of the kindest women I've ever met, second only to my grandma and their kids. They're like the brothers I never had. After that particular Christmas, I started spending more and more time with my uncle and his family. Over time, I basically became a part of their household. When I graduated college, I needed a place to stay while I job hunted and tried to get on my feet financially. That's when I found out my mom and Rick had broken up not long after she kicked me out, actually. I didn't know the full story behind their split, but most folks said it was because Rick had been cheating on her with someone else. The whole thing was incredibly ironic. She tossed me aside to chase a new life with him, and in the end, it blew up in her face. But my mom, being who she is, a proud, self-absorbed narcissist, she never reached out to apologize. And honestly, I'm glad she didn't. I wouldn't have had anything to say to her anyway. As far as I was concerned, we were done. That chapter of my life had closed. From that point forward, my uncle and his family were the only family I had left. I never really needed my mom, not when my grandparents were alive, and certainly not now that I had my uncle. He stepped up for me when it really mattered. Years have passed since all that, and I haven't heard a word from my mom in a long time. A lot has changed in my life too. I'm married now, and I have a daughter of my own. 2 years ago, I met John, he's 27, at a job I picked up right after college. It was supposed to be a temporary position, nothing serious. I didn't expect us to fall in love or end up building a life together. But here we are, 2 years later, married with a baby girl. Our daughter was born just 3 months ago, and I can say without hesitation that she's the love of my life. She's the light in our world, the one who makes everything feel right. And in a moment of emotion and pride, I made the mistake of posting about her on social media. During my pregnancy, I'd kept everything quiet. Only John, my uncle, and a small circle of close friends even knew I was expecting. I've never been one for posting my life online. I believe in keeping things private, and I've always been wary of inviting bad energy or envy into something good. But after my daughter arrived, I couldn't help myself. I wanted to share the joy. I made a post introducing her to the world, and that was the mistake that brought my mother back into my life. That's how she found out. Just last week, out of nowhere, I got an email from her. After 5 years of complete silence, she suddenly wanted to talk. I didn't know how to feel at first. There were a lot of mixed emotions. In her message, she said that a few extended family members had told her about the baby, and she claimed she was desperate to meet her granddaughter. The email was long. The first thing I did was scan through it to see if she'd offered even a single apology. She hadn't. Classic her. Instead of owning up to anything, she spent the whole message talking about how hard life had been since Rick left her. She wrote about how that relationship had left her with trust issues, how toxic it had been, and how broken she felt afterward. She went on to describe how lonely her life had become. All her friends had moved on, got married, had kids, built lives, and even those who hadn't were too busy with work or other commitments to spend time with her. And because she'd never built anything for herself, no career, no hobbies, she now had nothing to fall back on. She said she spent most of her days alone, with no one to talk to since I'd been gone. Now, she said, she wanted to reconnect. She wanted to fix things. She said she couldn't bear the loneliness anymore and hoped I'd let her back into my life. And honestly, the email might have sounded sad, but it didn't move me at all. Because in my heart, I'd already let go of the idea of having a mother. That decision was made the day she kicked me out to play house with a man who didn't even want me around. Yeah, it was painful to read how isolated she'd become, but I didn't owe it to her to bring her back into the fold just to ease her guilt or fill her time. She'd had 25 years to treat me like I mattered. 25 years to show me that I was truly her daughter and not just some inconvenience. But she never did. She chose herself every single time. And now, I'm choosing my life, my family, my peace. What really made my blood boil was that, in this long, emotional email, she never once said sorry. Not for abandoning me emotionally as a child, not for kicking me out when I needed stability, and not for leaving me to fend for myself while she clung to a man who only wanted her money. She poured her heart out about her suffering, but didn't spare a single word for what I went through. Yes, I was fortunate to have grandparents who stepped up, and yes, I was lucky my uncle welcomed me in, but none of that made up for the fact that I grew up constantly wondering why I wasn't good enough for my own mother. I spent years trying to earn her love, doing everything I could to win her over. It wasn't until I hit middle school that it finally hit me, this wasn't a me problem. It was a her problem. Still, those early years? I'll never get them back. And I'll never stop wondering why she even brought me into the world if she never intended to be a mother. Even now, she couldn't bring herself to apologize for any of it. Not the abandonment, not the emotional absence, not the moment she turned me away 5 years ago. And she absolutely knew, that it must have been hard for me. Back when my mom first kicked me out, I wasn't even close to my uncle yet. My grandparents were long gone, and I was basically on my own, but she didn't care. None of that mattered to her. The only thing that did was her relationship with Rick and the life she was trying to build with him. Their happiness came first. Always. Reading her email brought all that anger and resentment I'd been carrying for years straight to the surface. I couldn't just ignore it, I snapped. So instead of staying silent, I responded. And let me tell you, the message I sent was anything but nice. I went off. I called her out with every insult that had been sitting on my chest for years. I told her she wasn't even fit to be part of society, let alone anyone's mother. I said I would have rather grown up an orphan than have someone like her as a parent, someone who lacked respect for herself and treated others like they were disposable. I told her flat out that she and Rick were two of a kind, shallow, self-centered, and clueless, and it was a shame they didn't stay together because they deserved each other. I made it clear that she wasn't going to meet my daughter, or anyone else in my family. We might be related by blood, but that's where the connection ends. As far as I was concerned, she was nothing to me, and I intended to keep it that way. I hit send on that angry, curse-filled email without holding back, and of course, it didn't take long before she responded. Just a few hours later, I got another message from her. She said exactly what I expected, that if I was still so furious with her, I shouldn't have replied at all. She told me I had no right to say such cruel things when she was only trying to reach out and make peace. She claimed she knew she'd made a lot of mistakes as a mom and that the email was her way of trying to fix things and be part of her granddaughter's life. According to her, if I didn't want that, I could have just said so without being so brutal. And yeah, I did feel kind of like a jerk after reading that. I won't lie. Not because I think she was right, but because I let myself get so angry that I lost control of my words. That email was raw and messy, full of rage, and looking back now, I probably could have said what I needed to say in a calmer, more civil way. Still, even though I feel a little bad, I don't regret standing up for myself. She's old and lonely now, yeah, and I'm sure it hurt her to read that, but what did she expect after abandoning me for years, then showing up out of the blue and acting like everything could magically be fixed? I thought maybe I owed her an apology, but after talking it over with John, we came to the same conclusion: I don't. Maybe my email was harsh, maybe it was over the top, but it wasn't wrong. She never acted like a mother. She treated me like a stranger for most of my life, and now that she's out of options and alone, she wants to play happy family. That's not how this works. And the worst part? She still never apologized for any of it. Not once. Not for abandoning me, not for kicking me out, not for all those years of neglect. That silence says everything. So yeah, she can sit and cry about being lonely all she wants, but I'm not the one who made her that way. She did that to herself. And I don't plan on ever letting her back in. Even when I lived under her roof, it never felt like home. I never saw her as a mother. So the idea of letting her meet my daughter and calling her grandma? That's just laughable. That title is earned, and she never did anything to deserve it. I talked to my uncle and aunt too. They both said the same thing. My uncle reminded me that she distanced herself from everyone in the family for decades, not just me. He thinks I was more than fair, and maybe I went a little too far with the email, but he agreed that she shouldn't have expected anything else after the way she treated me. She had no right to show up out of nowhere, 5 years later, asking to meet my child, especially without even offering an apology. That's something I'll never forget and certainly never forgive. At this point, I've decided to move on and let the whole episode go. I have no desire to get pulled into her drama again. The only thing I want is to be present for the one person who truly needs me now, my daughter. I can't give her the love and care she deserves if I'm busy trying to argue with a woman who should have been out of my life a long time ago. So if my mother wants to keep sending angry emails, she can go right ahead. They're getting filtered straight into spam. I won't read them, and I definitely won't respond. Update 1: Hey everyone, thanks so much for the kind messages. My daughter's doing really well, and John and I are soaking in every moment of being new parents. After talking more about it, we agreed I don't owe my mom anything. What I said in that email may have been intense, but it came from a place of truth. She ignored me when I needed her most, and now that she's older and has no one left, she wants me to pretend like that never happened. Life doesn't work that way. She never made an effort to be my mom, so I'm under no obligation to treat her like family. Family isn't just blood, it's love, support, consistency. She never gave me any of that. So I don't feel bad for keeping her out of my life. And honestly, I feel lighter having said everything I needed to say. Update 2: Well, for reasons I'll never understand, my mother thought it would be a good idea to show up at my house just 2 weeks after I told her I didn't want anything to do with her. I was home alone on maternity leave and John was at work. Around the time he usually comes back, the doorbell rang. I didn't check before opening it, assuming it was him. But it wasn't. It was her. I'm guessing she asked one of my clueless relatives for my address, and someone actually gave it to her without thinking. The moment I saw her standing there, I slammed the door shut without a word. She was clearly stunned, probably didn't expect that reaction. But I wasn't in the mood for being polite or civilized. I just wanted her gone. She started yelling at me through the door, completely losing it. I was about to call the cops when she went full crazy and threw a rock through my window. Yeah. You read that right. She shattered my window and then bolted. Thankfully, my daughter was safe in her nursery, and I wasn't injured. The only casualty was the glass. I called the police right away and pressed charges. Now John and I are filing for a restraining order. We've also let my uncle know, so he can take precautions at his place too. It's gotten serious, and I'm not taking any chances when it comes to protecting my child. Update 3 is some justice was served. My mom was sentenced to several months of community service and had to pay a pretty hefty fine, plus the cost of the window she broke. We got a nice chunk of money out of it, to be honest. The only reason she didn't end up in jail is because she's got connections and a bulldog of a lawyer. But honestly, that's not our concern. We got what we needed: legal protection, some compensation, and peace of mind. John and I had already been thinking about moving to a bigger place, and now we've decided to go for it. This whole mess just made the decision easier. It's going to be me, John, and our daughter, our little family, starting fresh. Wish us luck.